Hey, welcome to my YouTube channel, Garrett Allen Auto Customs. Today I've got a 2015 Subaru WRX on the lift and it's in need of a clutch. So first things first, we're going to go over what parts we have and some of the tools that you're going to need to make this happen. So right off the bat, I went with an Exity clutch kit. The reason we use an Exity clutch kit is because it retains the factory flywheel. There are clutches out there that do not retain the factory flywheel, and that is something that you need to determine when you're ordering your clutch. So as far as the clutch kit goes, the Exity kit comes with a throwout bearing, a pilot bearing, an alignment tool for the clutch disc when we get it in there. The clutch disc itself, a quick tip on this clutch disc is it is directional. It says TM side right here, it's etched in. That's very important. That stands for transmission side. I watched another YouTube channel and these guys, in my opinion, had no business replacing a clutch on a car of this caliper, and they ironically put the clutch disc in backwards. That is going to cause major damage to your brand new parts, so do not do that. Pay attention to that. Just a little piece of detail. It sticks out. That's the side that is the transmission side. So that means that this hat that sticks up off your friction is going to be inside of your pressure plate. And the pressure plate is just a basic pressure plate. It looks just like the one from the factory. Honestly, I think Exity probably made the factory clutch that goes in these cars. It has a nice light pedal feel, and I think it is a good option unless you got it really turned up. So to move past that, obviously I got the car in the air. The first tool that was required was the specialty socket for the lug nuts. The customer didn't have this. Luckily I was able to dig one up and we got the wheels off. If you have the keyed lug nuts, one of the first tools you're going to need to find is going to be this socket right here. The next thing that you're going to need is a 32mm socket, and this 32mm socket is to remove the nut on the end of the CV shaft. The CV shafts have to be pulled out of the transmission to be able to pull the transmission back. So another crucial socket that you might not have if you're a do-it-yourselfer is a 32mm half-inch drive socket. These nuts are very tight. They will probably require a ratchet of this size or bigger. I'm going to use an impact because I have an air compressor and I'm in a professional setting. I have an air compressor, have an impact, so I'm going to go ahead and buzz that out. A couple other tips. As far as the brake calipers go, I use a small pry bar like this. There's two vent holes in the back of the caliper. You're going to pry those back just a little bit to loosen them up and take just the bracket off, the two 18 mils or 17mm bolts that the caliper is attached to. So you'll take that bracket off. You don't have to disassemble the caliper and the brake pads and stuff. That'll just make it easier to go together. So another thing that you'll definitely want to do is there's 10mm bolts that hold a speed sensor in the knuckle, and you're gonna have to take that speed sensor out either on the connector side under the hood or out of the knuckle, because to get the CV shaft out of the bearing housing, you have to flop it forward and it's going to pull that wire and they'll often break, and it's a very expensive mistake. So don't bust your speed sensors. Go ahead and pop them out. Sometimes they're going to be seized in there. Give them a little wiggle, kind of pull on them, maybe spray them down a little bit. They should come out. If they don't, you can always trace the wire all the way back and disconnect the connector and shove it out into the wheel well. So those are the tips to get this thing going. I'm going to go ahead and pull these calipers apart, pull these CV shafts off. We'll go underneath the car and I'll point out a couple of things that have to be taken off underneath the car, and we're going to get this transmission pulled out. Obviously another tool is a transmission jack. If you have it on the lift, hopefully the shop that you're at has a transmission jack. If not, I highly suggest getting one for this job. These are not the easiest to line up. So if you're gonna do it, make sure you got a good transmission jack. And if you're gonna do it on your back with jack stands, be ready for a fight. So let's check it out. We're on the passenger side of the car. I went ahead and loosened the nuts up so the impact doesn't rattle in your ears, but the 32 millimeter nut is right here. It's the CV nut. This is gonna slide in and out, it's splined. So once you get that nut off, obviously the rotor and the caliper are hanging, the rotor's pulled, the caliper's hanging like I explained. Another thing to pay attention to is the top bolt on this car has what's called an eccentric. And an eccentric is a cammed bolt that is required for the camber adjustment when the car is aligned. So being that we're taking this out, the alignment is no good anymore. So after you get the project done, you need to make sure that this bolt returns to the top hole in the knuckle and the car needs to be aligned. So we pulled both of those out, which I've already prepped this for take apart. Some of these are going to be hard, you might have to tap them a little bit. But this whole assembly here is going to slide down. Okay, I have the key in the ignition with the battery disconnected so I can turn the knuckle still. When you turn it all the way, you can push this back and pull down and out and squeeze the shaft around this knuckle. Okay, and now you're free. Your CV shaft's free. Once you get it free, you can grab your pry bar, you can come underneath the car. This is where some fluid starts coming out. You can see already got a pan here. Well, you probably can't see it, but there's a pan here. So I already did the other side. And you're just going to pry lightly on the back side of this, and the CV shaft's going to slide right out. And bam, CV shaft's removed. And now we can proceed to the underside of the car and pull apart a couple other parts like the drive shaft, a heat shield, and some of the wiring and some of the things that are connected to the transmission. So we're gonna go ahead and run the car up and get all that stuff pulled apart. Once you get that all the way up there, there's this big bracket. The bracket is bolted on there pretty well. Requires quite a few bolts to be removed. The first two are 17 millimeter. They're up here in the front. And there's two of them. So you get those two out, set those aside, change your socket. You're gonna need a 15 millimeter for the two nuts right here. And there was two in here that I took out already, so that's going to release this part. There's a little rubber isolator there, you want to make sure you don't lose that. Set that off to the side. The next piece is this back portion. It's held in with 14 millimeters to the body. I loosened them up. There's also an exhaust bracket that connects to this. It connects to the exhaust, you can remove that. You can't slide it out and around though. So now that we got that out, we can set that on the ground. I'm gonna go ahead and put my bolts back in the body of the car. Just to be sure that they don't get mixed up or lost. Two nuts on the cross member. And then the two big bolts that go up here. So like I said, I've wasted hundreds of hours probably in the last decade chasing bolts that I just simply lost, or somebody picked them up and walked off with them. And now I work in my own shop and I don't have to deal with that, but in a professional setting, you'll have that. All right, so now we got that bracket out of the way. We want to lower the training jack down to where the transmission is hanging free, as low as it'll go. Didn't move much. But that'll assist us in getting up here at all this bracketry and the shift cable, and there's a couple connectors. Honestly, it looks like somebody's been in this transmission already. So that was a loose bolt that I didn't loosen up that held the shifter cables on. And we're just gonna go ahead and get everything that's attached to the top of the transmission off, and then we'll be ready to pull the bell housing bolts loose and grab a pry bar and wiggle our transmission out. Right here in these two holes was a heat shield. Took those two bolts out, they were 12 millimeter. This right here is one of the shift linkages. You pull the pin, the cable comes off, put the washer and the pin back on. Above that is another shift linkage here. I left that one on because it's not very easy to get off of its little boss. So I took the two bolts that go in these two holes off and removed the bracket, and I'm gonna pop that off when the transmission gets lowered down. Moving forward, I got the bell housing bolts out. Up here, there was a black bracket and a bar that goes back to the body and there. So it goes from up here. Okay, now we're on the other side of the car, and there's a few things that have to be taken out over here. This right here is, there's a through bolt that this ground strap attached to that has to come loose. Then you have to take the starter out, and two of the starter bolts are actually the bell housing bolts. And then you have to take the slave cylinder off, which it's out of the way now. And then you're gonna put your chain on for your transmission jack, and then you get the last of the bell housing bolts out, and you're basically ready to come down, except for the one shifter cable that I said I was gonna leave attached and detach it as the tranny comes down. So I went ahead and got the transmission separated. It's kind of a tedious process. Some of them are stuck pretty good. A lot of them are stuck pretty good. Every one that I've done is stuck pretty good. So you carefully get some screwdrivers and pry bars in between there. And a buddy, and you shake this thing loose, and you do your best not to crack this transmission. So now we're gonna lower it down. Bird. Alright.
Got quite some length on that cable,
Yeah,
to be
that
honest.
cable is plenty long, so it's no use in sitting up there messing with it. We're gonna grab the trim tool. We're just gonna pop it off.
Oh, got some
Screw that back. Screw this up. Alright, so that cable's loose. This looks like it's just a black cap and a nylon insert. Pop it off with a trim tool. Well, that's plenty good.
Yeah.
We can,
It's a lot easier, everybody, if you actually use the screw jacks and level the tranny instead of trying to muscle it like I did. But
live and learn. Alright, so I'm gonna grab the camera and we're gonna take a look at this thing. This is,
do you want to get her in the light, or?
I was gonna show this right here. Alright, so it's got quite a bit of clutch material. Definitely smoked on the old bearing there. And I do believe we have a cooked clutch. You can see it's pretty bad. What is it here? Oh, it's a south bend.